I moved to Vancouver from Winnipeg when I was, I think, about 22 or 23 years old to go and do my master's degree in Vancouver. My master's of divinity in preparation to be a minister in the Presbyterian Church. So I was about 22 or 23 years old, and the first week of classes was a week-long intensive class, just one class all week, and it was a course on transitions. And the idea was people had come from all over the place, lots of people from British Columbia because we're in Vancouver, but people from across Canada, some people from the States had come to study there, and were starting their first year program. And the idea was it was to help you transition from wherever you've come from to now life at seminary, and also a big University of British Columbia is a big university as well, and to make that transition. At the time, I thought, oh, this is a dumb course, because I don't need to make a transition. I was thinking, I'm here. I'll do my 3 years, which ended up turning into 5. I'll do my 3 years, and then I'll be a minister, and I'll probably go back to Manitoba. So I don't need to transition. I'm just here temporarily, and then I'm going back. And I did come back, so I'm very thankful for that. But I was pretty foolish to think I didn't need to work on transitioning. And in that time, I also got married in those 5 years, speaking of transitions. And again, I was always, and still am, pretty much someone who looks forward into the future and doesn't really worry about what's behind. Oh, let's just move on to the next thing. This story that we just heard, a very short little bit of Abram's story, or if I call him Abraham, his name eventually gets changed to Abraham as we go down in the story. I used to read this almost exclusively as a future-oriented, looking-ahead kind of story. And I didn't read it as a story of major transition. But it's actually a story about major transition. I mean, it is future-oriented, but there's something before you get into that future. I used to read it as just Abram is told by God to go, and he goes. He trusts God, and God says, I will bless you, and I'll make you a blessing for others. And then we get to the end of this section, and we read, and Abram was 75 years old when this happened. And I always thought, wow, that just shows you it's never too late. You can always go, you can always, it could be at any point. We know nothing about his story up until he's 75, and then we get a lot of story after he's 75. But I want to focus today, instead of this future-oriented, I want to focus on the very, very beginning of what happens here, where Abram is told by God, go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you. And just try to imagine what is going on there. Leave everything behind. So this actually is not a story about a future and a new beginning. At least not yet. There's a promise of a beginning. But it's initially a story about a major ending. A major ending, right? My time in Vancouver, I didn't see that as we're going to start something and then I'm just going to go back. I wanted to just ignore that certain things in my life were ending. My parents were keenly aware that certain things were ending. But what about you? What endings have you faced or are you facing? Now, it might not be a journey like Abram and my story are both journey stories, right? Of go and you're going to leave something behind. And that's an ending. That chapter is over. It might be a journey. It could be a journey for you, maybe not. Some of you, that might really ring true if you've come to Winnipeg from somewhere else. It could be a job change, either through your own choice or not your choice. It could be a move from one school to another, like different education levels. Could be a relationship ending. Could be death of someone that you love. Or some other change that happens. These are all transition moments in our lives. But transitions begin with an ending. So think about an ending for you. It could have been in your control, or it could be completely out of your control. In all of these endings, there is grieving. And I was pretty much like everyone else in our culture, that we kind of want to ignore grieving or avoid it. Like we want to deny that. That's actually one of the stages of grieving, is denying. But we actually have to make room to grieve whatever it is that we're leaving behind, whatever it is that is ending. We need to make room for that. Andi Kolber, who's written a number of books. One is called Strong Like Water, and this is a quote from her book, Strong Like Water. She writes this: "Certainly, we do not want to make our home inside grief, but let us be clear, unless we make room for the reality of our entire human experience, grief will insist on taking over the whole house." That's an interesting quote, right? We don't want to just completely say, all we're doing is grieving. We're just making that our whole thing. But if we don't make room for it, because it's part of the human experience, it will actually take over. We actually need to give it space. Or if we deny it, it's actually going to take us over. Now, the Christian way of thinking, or the Christian worldview, actually helps us orient to this idea of how we need to grieve or lament things that have ended, and that's really important. A Christian way of thinking, actually, when you really start to look at what the scriptures say, and it actually starts to become clear that the beginning is not the beginning. We usually, actually, in the scriptures, we often begin with more of an ending, actually, with a leaving behind. The scriptures continually point to a movement from death to life, as in death is not the ending. The ending is actually going to be life, beyond death or after death. We find that we begin in darkness and move toward light, as opposed to the lights going out. And what we need to do is make space to actually acknowledge and process death and endings. We don't just skip it. We don't just get over it. It really kind of becomes something that we carry around with us. So some examples of this, not just in the scriptures, but just in the Christian tradition. Think of the season we're in. We didn't do a service on Ash Wednesday this year, but Ash Wednesday is the beginning of the season of Lent. And do you remember what is said when, so you get ashes put on your forehead as a sign of the cross? The ashes are a sign of mortality or death. And what is said when the ashes get put on is, remember you are dust, and to dust you will return. So we begin the most, arguably the most important season in the Christian year, is because it's building towards Easter. And we begin that with, let's all remember that we're all going to die. We actually begin with an ending, right? We begin with an acknowledgement of it's all going to end, it's all going to be over, and now I guess we're trusting in God for what's going to happen. It's sort of a walk that the movement in Holy Week actually ends up being sort of a smaller version of that, right? You have Good Friday, Jesus dies, is in the tomb. That's the end. That should be the end, death. And then there's Easter Sunday. You look back and you realize, oh, the beginning was actually the death. But even if you think of Advent before Christmas, we don't actually start with, oh, there's a new baby being born. Isn't that wonderful? We start with, in the darkness of Advent, in the darkness of the womb. It's dark before light. The light comes after we've acknowledged, oh, there's a lot of darkness. That's kind of how Advent Christmas works. The creation story, there's chaos before creation. The Bible actually opens with what? There was darkness over the face of the deep. It doesn't start with, let there be light. It almost starts with that, but it's the darkness and then let there be light. We start in darkness and then we move towards light. Death, acknowledged, and then resurrection. Even baptism, which we think about as, oh, that's the beginning, that's the start. But most of the imagery around baptism in the scriptures, in Paul's letters, is actually we are baptized into the death of Jesus. As in, baptism is a dying to the old self and then a raising up out of the waters into a new life, right? The Christian imagination is always saying, you know what the first thing is? Death. You know what the first thing is? Darkness. And let's actually acknowledge it and live in that. And we trust in God that that isn't the final word. There's something else coming. This is sort of Abraham's journey as well. Leave everything you know behind, and you'll be a blessing. There'll be a land I'll show you, but he doesn't know what it is. This happens in the story of God's people leaving Egypt to go into the promised land. What happens in that story? Well, it kind of starts with everything's bad. They're slaves in Egypt. Yes. And then they decide to leave, and then, day 2, they get into the promised land, right? No, of course not. The first thing that happens after they get out of Egypt, after being chased and going through the sea, but they end up in a wilderness. And they're in the wilderness for 40 years. So actually what happens is it's not quite as easy to say, acknowledge grief and acknowledge darkness. There's always going to be endings. We need to make space for that. And then if you do that, what we want to do in our culture is we say, well, okay, sure. I'll check that off my list. I'll grieve. And if I do that properly, then, a couple of days later, I'll be in the new thing, right? Right? That's what our culture wants to say. It's like, well, if we just find the right answer, then we'll get there. But also in the Christian imagination is this idea of actually that isn't how it works. Because in between the ending at the beginning, right? We have an ending at the beginning. In between that ending and the new beginning, there's wilderness. There's wilderness. And the story of getting out of Egypt is such a great one because one of the things that they do when they're in the wilderness is the people start complaining because the wilderness is really hard. And so they complain and say, oh, why did you bring us out of Egypt? I mean, at least we were getting food and drink in Egypt. And that's exactly what we do as well, right? When something hard has happened or an ending has happened and we're now in this time of wilderness, we look back and go, oh, why did I leave that good job? Or, I wish I could go back to then. Sometimes we have no control over that wishing, and other times we think, oh, I made the wrong choice. This is worse than where I was. I'm sure maybe Abraham sometimes felt that way. Why did I follow God? This is what the Israelites did in the wilderness, looking back at Egypt, thinking, it was better to not have freedom because we weren't starving. Wilderness ends up being, and we're going to talk about this a little more in this season of Lent, that this wilderness that follows an ending begins mostly with a period of disorientation, where we don't know what's going on. Where God says to Abraham, I'll show you the land that you're going to come into. Well, where is that? And he just goes, not knowing, really. Wilderness is marked by a time of disorientation. Most of it is disorientation. But it's not all disorientation. It's not all, I'm not sure what's happening. Because the other thing that happens in the wilderness in scriptures is formation. So you have an ending, you have wilderness, which actually is disorientation and formation. God's people really become God's people in the wilderness. I mean, that's what happens. They encounter God in the wilderness. That's when they receive the Ten Commandments and the law. And you think about Jesus' story. Jesus goes out into the wilderness and is somehow formed. His ministry begins after he comes out of the wilderness. And this happens for us too. It becomes a time where we can be more reliant on God, where we suddenly go, oh, I have nowhere else to turn. So we turn to God, and we're formed and shaped by God's Spirit in this time of wilderness. So we have an ending, and then wilderness, which is disorientation and formation, before reaching a new beginning. And Lent is kind of this season where formation and sometimes disorientation can happen. It's very unfamiliar to our culture's way of doing things. With Abraham, God said to him, go to the land that I will show you. And Abraham went. And before he entered the new space where he was going to go, he had no idea where he was going to end up. And the key in facing an ending and moving into this time of wilderness or transition, the whole time, what Abraham did was he trusted God. And that's our call as well, is to, though we may not know the step or the path or exactly where it might be leading, we need to trust in God, that God will see us through to whatever it is the new beginning is that God has in store for us.